I'm Herb Stevenson.
And I'm Sahadeo Ramharak.
Welcome to Natural Passages, revealing the unmarked doors of life.
We're so glad to have you here to join us today.
Yeah, we're going to chat about different levels of intimacy and how our ability to be consciously present enables us to discover greater degrees of awareness. So this will be interesting for you because it's really trying to provide a dynamic that most of us ignore, but in my belief, we seek. So join us.
Should I jump in right away?
I hope so.
All right. So you suggest that there are 3 levels of intimacy. So first, how do you describe intimacy?
Some years ago, about 20 years ago, I came up with a model called a contact model. And contact basically means is engaging and connecting to something, yourself, other people. And so intimacy is a degree of conscious awareness, which is presence with vulnerability. So in prior podcasts, we talked about vulnerability is not a virtue for many people. Mostly because they don't really understand the interaction between vulnerability and presence. So if I'm fully present, I can be more open-hearted. Best example most of us have of when vulnerability feels safe is we fall in love with somebody. The worst part about it that shows the dynamic of falling in love with somebody is you find out that they're not in love with you. So we go from intimacy to feeling totally exposed and embarrassed.
Okay. Yeah.
So what I want to talk about is intimacy at different levels, but also I want to talk about that dynamic of how intimacy actually works in our day-to-day lives. And the interesting part is when we begin to understand that and are able to, we can actually see it. And we can tell,
Absolutely.
okay, I'm starting to feel too vulnerable. When I feel too vulnerable, I feel exposed. So feel my body, wiggle my toes, get back in myself and say, okay, what's leading me to feeling too vulnerable? Okay. And but the most common thing is everybody remembers and understands the model is that when you're probably about 10 or 12 in your first love and you're so smitten and then you find out that the other person doesn't care about you. And it's like you're going through all these things. Your mind is, how could I have been so stupid? And how did I misunderstood? And then they misled me and they set me up to embarrass me. And we go through all these stories. And then we end up coming back to the real issue is we became vulnerable and it felt intimate. It felt relational and connection, but it wasn't necessarily shared at the same time or same level.
Right.
That's day-to-day life. We can decide how vulnerable and intimate we want to be, and that comes out of presence. So that would be the core of it, I guess, because if I'm to fully explain how it works, if I'm fully present and I'm vulnerable, I can be intimate. So I'm relational. I feel safe, comfortable, relational, excited, engaged. If my vulnerability goes up and my presence goes down, usually it's a trigger of some reaction. So I feel exposed. So I have a high level of vulnerability and I have a low level of presence, which means I feel out of control. I feel chaotic.
Okay. Yeah.
So I can be defensive at a basic level. I can be afraid or scared, embarrassed, loss of self. I'm overwhelmed. I can be oversensitized. One of the things that I've applied the model and this concept with people who have terminal illnesses to help them understand what they're going through emotionally. And the first thing they tell me if they've been diagnosed with cancer is they went to the exposed state and felt totally terrorized.
Wow.
And incapable of rationally, and the only thing they could feel was the terror and the pain. So what happens in us as we can only stand so much vulnerability, so it's not that we necessarily get more present yet. The vulnerability goes to zero because the body can't stand it, so it shuts it down.
Okay.
So one of the ways that happens is we start desensitizing our body.
Okay. This is that numbing that you were talking about.
The numbing. So there's no feeling. I'm frozen, cold, dissociated. All of this means I have no vulnerability and I have no presence. I'm literally in the shutdown.
Okay.
And then what happens naturally is then that shifts over to more presence, but no vulnerability. So now I'm where most people live, in the rational mind. I'm very stoic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the mind gets defensive and saying, you did this to me.
Okay.
So I had to blame somebody else instead of understanding that we missed. We didn't become intimate because we didn't connect and stay engaged at that same level. And so if I find somebody who is either gone into exposed or going into a numb stage, I'll get them to look me in the eyes and I'll say is what would support you right now? The interesting thing is, as soon as you ask them a question of what would support you and they make eye contact, they come out of the numb stage or they come out of the exposed stage and they're able to just sit. And I'll say, do you want to explore what happened or do you just want to stop? If they really had a bad experience, they're going to say, I want to stop. I'll deal with this later. And I'll say, fine. And if you want to work on it, we can later. But the idea is then when the mind at that point gets razor sharp in focus, I often refer to it as Spock.
Okay.
Okay. No emotions.
Yeah.
Razor sharp brain.
Yeah.
And it's the razor sharp brain is also then freezing the emotions at that point so they don't feel vulnerable again.
Okay.
Now, in time, they will then come back to, okay, I have presence and I'm willing to become a little more vulnerable. Often instead of using the word vulnerable, I'll say, you want to explore this a little bit, be a little more open to whatever happened. So in doing that as a process of learning intimacy, we begin to realize we actually can control this. So if I'm beginning to feel vulnerable, I can get back into my body, grounding like we've talked about in the past. I can think about, okay, I wonder what triggered that. As soon as I ask a question, it takes me out of the emotional side and back into the rational side.
Okay.
Sometimes a person will start to go into defensiveness, and I'll say, I'm hearing some defensiveness. I'm not trying to put you in a position of being defensive. Excuse me. So what's triggering this? Would you like to explore that? Because something I said obviously triggered you and you felt like I judged you or did something of that nature. And by just unraveling it, that brings them out of the exposed stage over to the rational, and then they'll come up with, well, that triggered this reaction from my past. I said, okay, so now we know that that's a kind of trigger. Would you like to do something about that?
Do you want to deal with it or do you want to keep having this triggered response all the time? Okay.
I often say to it, you've probably had that reaction about 10,000 times. When would you like to stop having that?
So this is like being aware of that ping pong state.
Right, same thing. It's always coming back to is do you want to be present and in control of yourself or do you want to be reactive? So this model, people who watch this, they can actually track, you can watch somebody else. I've done this and we'll post this on the site for people to be able to look at the model. You can track a relationship. So if I'm at an excited place and I feel really connected, and that might be threatening to another person who suddenly gets defensive.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And they're like, that's too much vulnerability for me.
Too excited. Yeah.
Back it down. Okay? And if they look at their relationships, they can track where each of them have gone at this place, and you can see this big gap. And we begin to understand this. What's happening is they both have a different pattern about how to be present and how to be vulnerable to each other. And it changes the whole dynamic of how to work with it. Now, when we go, what we're really talking about now is called the edge of intimacy.
Okay.
So if we know it's an edge and we can move away from it, or we can work closer to it, we can go into it, is we begin to realize is what is the quality of life I want to have? And we don't think in terms of that. We look for patterns of you do this and that makes me feel good, so I'm happy about that. But you do that and that doesn't make me feel good, so then I have my reactions. And then what happens with the model you begin to ask yourself is, okay, I've had that reaction 10,000 times. Am I done with it?
Right.
Okay. So one of the favorite phrases I use for myself, it's become humorous. It wasn't originally when I did it, but was a recognition that I had my own patterns to avoid doing certain things.
Okay.
Exercise was one of them. I forced myself with discipline to go exercise.
Yeah.
Until I realized, well, I'm telling myself a damn story. The exercise feels good. It's helpful. I'm in my 70s. I'm still active. I have a higher quality of life. So get over myself, and that's my other way of saying quit whining. Okay?
Yeah.
Everybody's got a whine.
Yeah.
If it's too big, I'll send them 5 pounds of cheese.
I like that. I'm going to steal that.
So the idea is the more present I get and the more I'm aware of these types of things, the more I witness myself and realize, oh, that's getting in my way. I don't want to do that. I stop. Same thing is in writing the books. This is something that where I come from, you don't do. And it's like, why not? So get over yourself. Enjoy the process. If it's something it's been a dream of yours to be writing, we do it. So there's 4 of them here. There's actually 8 published now, and there's another 6 in manuscript form.
Okay.
And I'm having a lot of fun.
See?
It's okay to have fun.
It's okay.
Yes. So the 3 levels of intimacy, though, this is the second one is called innermost edge of intimacy. And the innermost edge of intimacy is what it does is we now have gotten comfortable and learned how to manage our vulnerability, to pay attention and see when we're vulnerable. Okay. And so we begin to explore saying is I'm going to stay more present and allow more vulnerability or openness to occur, which means I can become more aware of another person in a way that I feel connected.
Okay.
Best examples I could say about that is when you went through the men's program, the Natural Passages program, you found that there was a level of trust because everybody was present to have a more intimate conversation.
Absolutely.
In a safe environment.
Yeah.
And that's an innermost edge. I'm revealing even more of myself than I normally would, but I'm also willing to sit while they reveal to me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that impact is it begins to shift us that it's okay to be who I am. That's probably the biggest thing that comes out of the people who commit to that 1-year program is that they are able to realize it's okay to be who I am. And there are people out there who agree with me and have been through this process. And so that's the innermost. And then the last edge is the inmost, and this is more for like people who meditate. And what that means is you're getting to that place of quiet. Okay. And so the monkey mind or the bouncing Betty or whatever it is that's going on inside your head, you just suddenly gets tired.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people think, well, that's the ultimate, and in a respect it is, but the real issue of meditation is the fact you just do it.
Yeah.
Every day I'm saying, I'm going to invest in myself some time for quiet.
Yes.
I ask people 5 minutes. Sit for 5 minutes of quiet. And even if the monkey mind eventually learn to entertain yourself and saying is well, I tell them to send the monkey mind to Bermuda.
Right.
for a well-earned vacation because you need some peace and quiet. If that doesn't help, then think about a place that absolutely you love to go, like a beach or woods or something like that, and just sit with that until suddenly the mind gets quiet and you remember and feel that space. That's an inmost, very personal place for everybody. Okay. And it is an edge. We can't live there all the time, just like we can't on any of the others. But we can be more present so that we have, probably the best way I can describe it, a more more contentment in our life.
Okay.
Because when I'm more present, I'm more content with what's going on, with what I'm doing, how I'm performing, how I'm living. If there's something that's missing, I know that, okay, what do I want to focus my attention on around resolving that? Nothing has to be fixed today. The worst habit we have, I tease people, and says when they revised the Constitution with the Bill of Rights, they forgot one American right, which is the right to bitch. Because we get caught in our bitching.
Yeah.
I call it lost in the bitching. We're telling stories and we're completely absent to ourselves.
And it's interesting, like, think about all the stuff that's on TV. We're just watching people's stories. All these reality TV shows, it's just people and their stories. So you get that messaging, it gets ingrained to you that your life is just these stories. It's brunch, it's whatever it is that you're doing, it's a story that you're making up.
Well, that's the human experience. When we finally realize that we're living our story. I mean, in Native American traditions, indigenous traditions, one of the old principles or proverbs, I guess you would say, is the Great Spirit loves stories. And the reason we know, he created humans.
Yeah.
Because we all are. We're all a story. We're a fabrication of all the creative adjustments that we've gone through life, all the experiences, how we made meaning of them, how we're supposed to react. And when we just get quiet and we realize, all the crazy can just go by and you can stand there and watch all of this and see how you don't have to participate in that. And it just shifts things.
Get empowered.
Empowering is being able to be self-sovereign, which basically is not saying is totally independent, but it's saying is you're self-determining. You're, like we've talked about in prior podcasts, is you're self-defining, giving yourself permission. I've said this to you many times, how old you have to be to give yourself permission to be fully who you are. And you never can come up with a number.
Each moment now.
And that's really where we are with it.
I've seen this model, and I've seen looking at myself be able to have different levels of intimacy with people in your life, and then you can track it. And when you're actually able to do it and experience it, people gravitate to you. They want to have these little notions, these elements of intimacy, connection. It helps heal people. I think especially like in healthcare, it's intimate to go to someone and trust and tell them, hey, this is the problems that I'm experiencing in my body or my illness, or this is what's causing it, and how do I resolve it? You're having to let someone else come into your life to help you. That's a vulnerable state of being. So if it's not handled well by another professional to match that intimacy, then we can miss the healing.
Well, the intimacy, meeting at that edge of intimacy, is one of the strongest validations a person can have. That's why the exercise about doing eye contact with your kids or with your partner, to experience being seen is validating. From an existential perspective, it's deep inside us, is it's how I know I exist, and it's how I know I'm important. And I think I've said this in prior podcasts, but it highlights the point. When I try to make eye contact with everybody, and especially people in service and service with meaning, like hospitality things. A whole lot of people just come up and are grumpy and want this, want that, and never pay attention that it's a human being who's actually trying to their best to provide service to you. So I make sure that they see I'm making eye contact and I smile. Completely changes their demeanor.
Absolutely.
Because they've just been validated as a human being who's doing the best they can to support your experience. And so if I give that tiny little exchange, it completely shifts the whole process. And we don't do that very much. And we don't say thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole lot of that. There's the expectations of you're here to serve me, and they don't realize that subordinates a person. No one likes that.
It's so interesting because even you just made me think about like New York. When you walk down, you don't make eye contact with people. A lot of people we cannot handle because if you lock eyes, then it's like an awkward, intimate moment with the person that's trying to pass you.
It'll make it even worse. Smile at the same time.
Yeah.
And then they really freak out.
And then they really freak out. Yes. And I've definitely experienced that when I first moved back there. And I was like, why is the world so mean? But the people that were making eye contact with you usually wanted to ask you for some money. So that's another reason why people probably too don't by the eye contact. But
it makes it a very lonely life.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part, is it does make it very lonely. So, very difficult. Well, it's
interesting, like in cultures where you are trained and taught to not, like certain times, like you can't look your parents in the eye, or you can't, right? But sometimes those are the conversations and moments where you need to have that eye contact for that vulnerability, for the impact. And it's powerful. I think I've seen it in connection, I think in my own family members, where I've been able to, you shift people's mood when they actually can see you and when you be seen by them.
Yeah. I mean, if you stay present and engaged, they eventually come out of their trance, whatever story they're telling themselves. And they're shocked abruptly because you're actually looking at them. And so that makes a big difference too. So there's no question about it. So I think we pretty much exhausted this. Or any other thoughts or questions you have?
Not right now.
Okay.
But how does presence factor into intimacy?
Well, I mean, according to the model, presence is the critical piece to everything. Yeah. The more I am consciously aware of being present, I can be vulnerable if I so choose. If I'm present, I will appreciate you when I look at you. If I'm not, I'm just, a body acting like it's engaging you.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest part society has right now, because we've numbed out so much by being busy, and all these other things that's led to our monkey mind. So the impact of it it's very difficult. So if you can be present by being consciously aware of what am I doing, observing, thinking, am I willing to reach out across and acknowledge you, even just visually, it becomes intimate. But the problem we've had is we've bastardized the word, because we think intimacy is, purely romantic and relational, and it's not. I truly believe this. I think everybody yearns to be acknowledged and seen, which is an intimate moment.
Absolutely. And I think during the program, Natural Passages, when I went and I was on that journey for that year, I definitely experienced this with a group of men that were there. And for me, that was a really vulnerable experience. One, never, this is all new to me. And then everything that we did, and even just being out in nature for 3 days, 4 days straight, or camping, right? Those are all things that I've never done before. So they put me in a vulnerable place. And then also meeting all these strangers, right? And what are we willing, what are the different layers of ourselves that we're willing to share? So it definitely taught me a lot and allowed me to get comfortable with myself, that I could be able to achieve this, be vulnerable and experience intimacy with like anybody. across the board.
What's true, and for men, the issue is to realize if you're willing to engage, be present, and intimate, so slightly vulnerable, you can build relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A lot of men do not have relationships after they get married and they move on.
Yeah.
Their relationships are professional, very distant.
Yeah.
There is no close relationships. What this allows us to realize is we can do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not saying everybody's going to turn into a bunch of mushy individuals. It's quite the opposite, because if you've ever been around somebody with a lot of presence, they can be scary to a lot of people because they realize there's an inner strength there that they're not sure about.
Yeah.
And so courage to be vulnerable is a big deal.
That was how I first met you.
I scared the bejesus out of you. Yeah. Well,
here we are having intimate moments years later.
Yeah, live and living color. Well, thank you for watching. I'm Herb Stevenson.
I'm Sahadeo Ramharak.
And we really do appreciate you watching or listening to the Natural Passages podcast. We hope you will subscribe, as well as refer us to other people, and help us continue to build a following and maybe make a small difference in the world.
So leave us some comments and questions, and we'll catch you next time.
Take care and be well. Bye-bye.